Luce intern this summer. Thank you all so much for coming to our panel today, Freedom from Feminism, Why Left-Wing Feminism Has Lost Its Appeal. I have the pleasure of introducing you to our moderator today, Christina Hoff Sommers. She is a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and a member of the Clare Boothe Luce Advisory Board. She was a professor of philosophy at Clark University, where she specialized in moral theory. She has written articles for numerous publications, such as the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Weekly Standard, Washington Post, and The Atlantic. She is the author of the books Who Stole Feminism and The War on Boys, and her most recent book, co-authored with her AEI colleague, is called One Nation Under Therapy. She also wrote Taking Back Feminism Policy Express that you all have in front of you. Ms. Sommers has braved being a guest on shows like The Oprah Winfrey Show, Jon Stewart's The Daily Show, and Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher, where she sat on stage with our lovely Michael Moore. She has also braved college campuses as a CBL campus lecturer. Please join me in welcoming Christina Hoff Sommers.
Thank you. Well, it's lovely to be here. It's one of my favorite organizations, is the Clare Boothe Luce Institute. So today, this is the Clare Boothe Luce Freedom from Left-Wing Feminism, and it's a summit. And by the way, I was once a left-wing feminist, I have to confess, many years ago. That all changed when the chairman of my department, this was sometime in the last century, toward the end, the chairman of my department asked me to teach a course in feminist theory. Feminist philosophy. I was a feminist. I was a philosopher. Send in the textbooks. I'll teach it. And I was actually astonished by what I confronted. I had taught many, many courses, and I had my chairman ask me to teach new topics. And it was always a delight to read the new research and engage. And and philosophy textbooks are typically organized on themes, and you read the best that was thought and said on both sides of a contentious issue. These books did not present both sides of a contentious issue. It was all from one point of view, from a far left-wing, rather eccentric, extreme feminist perspective. It was the gamut from A to B, if you will, the full gamut. They left out the rest of the world. They left out most women. And these books were just a steady diet of a kind of women are from Venus, men are from hell philosophy, as well as, and this was, as I said, in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s, I had feminist philosophers who were still Marxist, which was so irritating to me because it was just so juvenile. But there they were, giving this radical theory to undergraduates, which I wouldn't have minded as a philosopher if there'd been a little bit of that, and then it was balanced by some literature that challenged the eccentric and outrageous things that were being said by the radical feminists. And I do mean radical. There was one, for example, who dedicated her textbook to the women in my women's studies ovular in the spring of 91. And I looked at that word ovular. I hadn't seen it before, and I was about to go to the dictionary until I realized she'd made it up. She didn't like the word seminar. She'd calculated that the root word was associated with the very essence of male power. So she changed it to ovular, her feminist perspective, from her feminist alternative. And it was funny, but she wasn't kidding. That was the other thing. There wasn't a lot of humor in this literature. So it was all one-sided. It was all very radical, and it was humorless, unrecognizable, really, at all levels. And so I began to challenge it, which wasn't exactly appreciated. I was considered a heretic and excommunicated from a religion I didn't know existed. But this is one reason, as I said, I'm a great fan of the Clare Boothe Luce Institute, because it provides a forum for women who dissent from feminist orthodoxy. Empowered women, modern women of the new millennium, but who do not speak in the rhetoric of hardline campus feminism. And we're completely outside that paradigm. And my colleagues in feminist theory like to say, oh, the Western canon was a creation of the white male patriarchal elite. So the women's voices were silenced. Then they turned around and created a feminist canon which gives voice to an even narrower swath of the population, sort of radical left-wing feminist perspective on the world. And so most of Women's Studies is a wholly owned subsidiary of radical left-wing feminists. They left out moderate women, libertarian women, conservative women. We were not given a place at the table. We have been, to use their language, we've been rendered invisible, voiceless. So again, the Clare Boothe Institute brings together women who will give you a different point of view. So what you will hear today from these brilliant and lovely ladies is outside what you're likely, unlike what you're likely to hear on your campus. This may be one of the first conservative ovulars ever to be offered. So our first speaker, I will introduce all of them and then they'll come up one after the other, speak for about 15 to 20 minutes. It will be, I will time it on my iPad. Not my iPad, my iPhone. Kathryn Lopez is an award-winning opinion journalist and editor of the National Review Online. I don't know when she sleeps. Maybe you'll tell us if that is part of the job. She's an associate editor of National Review. Her work has appeared in Wall Street Journal, Washington Times, too many places to mention. She's been on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. She often speaks to high school and college groups, and she writes in the area of bioethics, religion, feminism, education, really all topics. Again, just tireless and prolific and amazing. Grace Marie Turner, I just told several colleagues at AEI, they asked me what I was doing, and I told them I was going to be on a panel with, they said, Grace Marie Turner, she's so great. She is president of the Galen Institute, a public policy research organization founded in 1995 to promote informed debate over free market ideas for health reform. And she's the editor of Empowering Healthcare Consumers Through Tax Reform. And she produces a widely read electronic newsletter, Health Policy Matters. Check it out. She has been published in major newspapers, and again, like everyone else, Wall Street Journal, USA Today. She's been on all the shows, venues. Her early career was in politics and journalism, where she received numerous awards for her writing in the area of politics and economics. And finally, Diana Furchtgott-Roth, who was a colleague of mine for many years at American Enterprise Institute. She is a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, where she directs the Center for Employment Policy, and she's an expert in many areas, but taxation, education, pensions, immigration. Prior to joining, I have a little cold, so excuse me. Prior to joining the Hudson Institute, she was the chief economist in the U.S. Department of Labor, and from 2001 to 2002, she served as chief of staff for the President's Council on Economic Advisors under George W. Bush. I remember visiting her in the White House. She was right there. She's the author of How Obama's Gender Policies Undermine America. You could hold it up. It's really a great read.
It makes a great gift.
Yes.
Christmas present, Valentine's Day present, and it's less than $5 on Amazon.
How Obama's Gender Policies Undermine America. And she's also wrote Feminist Dilemma, and my favorite, Women's Figures, an Illustrated Guide to the Economics of Women in America. And if anybody ever tells you that women earn 76 for every cent, women are being cheated out of almost 25% of their income and so forth, read her book. She has the definitive reply, because that is a false claim. She writes, again, as everyone else, the Washington Post, New York Times, etc., and she is a frequent guest on all the major radio shows and a college lecturer of much sought after. So we will begin with Kathryn Lopez. Please join me in welcoming these wonderful speakers, starting with Kathryn.
Hello, thank you very much. So I was distracted a few moments ago by this painting of Ronald Reagan. The Capitol Hill Club has so much Ronald Reagan, they had to put 3 of him in one painting. How many of you are from New York? I knew it. They're New York City. Okay, yes, that's what I figured. I was gambling on that. I figured that was probably a decent bet, so I thought I'd start out by sharing with you what was on the cover of New York Magazine late last year. New York is a glossy magazine where you can typically go for some morally questionable ads in the back. Don't bother looking. It's not. The point is, it's not exactly published by James Dobson and from Focus on the Family, and it's definitely not published by the Vatican. So I did a double take when, back in late November or early December, I was walking down Lexington Avenue and saw a cover. Did you hear that? I was proving I was from New York. And I can't even redo it. But anyway, authenticity. I saw the cover that said, 50 years ago, the pill ushered in a new era of sexual freedom. It might have created a fertility crisis as well. Now, that's the kind of piece I'd write for a Catholic magazine. I have, actually. But this was something different and quite remarkable, I thought, albeit perhaps a long time in coming. Last year was the 50th anniversary of the birth control pill, and this New York magazine piece talked about one celebration of it. They had a party for the pill at Manhattan's Pier Hotel. The cake for the gala event read, "One small pill, one giant leap for womankind, one monumental moment in history." One of the abortion industry professionals on stage that night declared, "Today we operate on a simple premise that every girl should be able to grow up to be anything she wants, and she can only do so if she has the ability to chart her own reproductive destiny." Now, you don't have to be the Pope in Rome to consider that a slightly false and maybe misleading promise. There are some limits to and consequences of that recharting. There's some things you just can't change. In fact, the female New York Magazine reporter wrote, "The pill is so ingrained in our culture today that girls go on it in college, even high school, and stay on it for 5, 10, 15, and even 20 years. It's not at all out of the ordinary for a woman to be on the pill from ages 18 to 35 for prime childbearing years. That's a long time to turn one's body into an efficient little non-procreative machine." The writer explained one of the real long-term effects of taking the pill. One anxiety, am I pregnant, is replaced by another, can I get pregnant? The days of gobbling down the pill and running to, this is the writer, and running out to a CVS at 3 a.m., which you can do in New York City, for a pregnancy test recede in the distance, replaced by a new set of obsessions. The pill didn't create the field of infertility medicine, but it turned it into an enormous industry. Inadvertently, indirectly, infertility has become the pill's primary side effect. Now, the pill is frankly something that not even the Catholic Church has effectively spoken in one voice about in decades past. It's certainly not something that religious conservatives have been talking about in any kind of way, a unified way. I suspect it's not something we all agree on. But I bring it up to you in part because pro-lifers have often been falsely accused of being anti-woman, when in fact it is frequently, say, a crisis pregnancy center that truly loves and cares for a mother and a child and gives them the tools to truly pursue some kind of happiness. And yes, it's those crazy abstinence crusaders who, and even the Pope in Rome, who clearly have some seriously practical points to make on sexual morality. And I submit to you that some of that war on women rhetoric that you may hear around town in debates, especially but not limited to issues surrounding abortion, may have something to do with a reality that our critics, I think, see the writing on the wall. There's a new sexual revolution, I think, of sorts, and I can talk about it more in the questions, that could be seen on this New York Magazine cover and in conversations like it that I keep hearing in the most unusual of places. There's a Soho event I was at on Tuesday night. Soho, like cool and trendy, and they're talking about issues like this. The writing can be seen in part in reactions, I think, to Sarah Palin, who's a complex lightning rod for sure, but also very clearly a pro-life woman. And some of the reactions to her, I think, had everything to do with that. I mentioned Sarah Palin because I believe some of the reaction to her, again, has everything to do with this, with the waning appeal of traditional liberal abortion, legal abortion advocating feminism. My friend Andrew Breitbart says that Palin posed an existential threat, he says in this new movie about her, to the institutional left when she appeared on the scene. You can argue that's dramatic, but I think there's something to it. What that means to me is for so long,
the only women we seemed to see prominently in politics, with some exceptions, were what we call pro-choice. Her emergence on the national scene was an impossible to miss lifting of a veil that is far more than simply political. In some profound ways, I think the feminist lie is about up. I see it in so many college students and 20 and 30-somethings, many of you here today, obviously, and even older women and men who want more than the goods the culture has been selling. So many young women today realize that we girls can do anything does not mean everything or a license for everything. The government owes you everything. They realize that choice and freedom aren't exactly what the women's movement, the so-called women's movement, said they were. In truth, they weren't really always about freedom. It was a false sense of freedom in some, but by not all means, at least consciously, it was about sexual license. Broadly speaking, it was about remaking a reality that really couldn't be remade. And that's not Phyllis Schlafly making those points. It's even New York Magazine, and it's actress Raquel Welch, the sex symbol of the late 70s and early 80s. In her memoir published last year, she wrote, "Margaret Sanger opened the first American family planning clinic in 1916. Of course, the founder of Planned Parenthood, and nothing would be the same again. Since then, the growing proliferation of birth control methods has had an awesome effect on both sexes and led to a sea change in moral values." I did a double take, you have to understand. That's something that I would write. That's not something that I expect to see an actress writing. Sex symbol Raquel Welch taking on Planned Parenthood. You may not realize this because you've come to a town this summer in which the House of Representatives voted to defund Planned Parenthood. But this was no small thing. They may not have gotten the job done this time in the House, obviously, but it's a remarkable thing that the House voted as it did. Planned Parenthood has long been a sacred political cow. Sanger is praised by everyone, it seems, from Hillary Clinton on down. Barack Obama did the homage on the campaign trail, as so many do, Republicans and Democrats. The Democratic Party may have rallied in the end for the sake of holding their base together, but something significant happened, indicative of what I think is both a changing climate and endless opportunity on spending issues, on cultural issues, nationally and locally. Raquel Welch, by the way, in her book, which was called Beyond the Cleavage, also talks about other traditional ideas that have been out of style in elite culture. The two-parent family and marriage, despite her own admitted failings on these fronts. She emphasized the different roles of mothers and fathers and how they can truly make a formative difference in a child's life. And as Christina was saying, this isn't given thinking in many of the academic world and elsewhere, like my native state house in Albany. In her book, as it happens, Welch testifies to something that Pope Paul VI warned of during the Summer of Love in 1968, about the dangers of treating fertility as if it were disease, and what it would do, a wide scale, to men and women, and individually. But making these points in dissent of routines that were so mainstreamed in the 60s and 70s is usually, again, the stuff of popes and family values think tanks, maybe. Something big and real is going on when glossy magazines and actresses are. These are points that no one's looking to be hurtful or judgmental about. They're observations, sometimes from painful experience, as in the case of Welch and so many others, many of whom were talked about in this magazine article, seeking to help us at this moment where people seem open to something different, something that's been under the radar and available and could be pretty attractive, an alternative to what seems to be mainstream. Increasingly, talk like this may be the bitterest pill to groups that have for decades insisted that they represent so-called women's issues and women's interests, because ultimately it's a more liberating message about the nature of life and love and men and women that the feminist revolution ever offered. How am I doing on time?
Very well.
Oh, okay. Now, you don't, of course, have to agree with the Pope or me or Welch on all of these points, but I suspect there are points of convergence. And I suspect that you might agree with me that it's fascinating that they're increasingly being raised in the unlikeliest of places. It's fascinating, too, to see, after years of campaigns dedicated to conditioning us to making a liberal woman president, there are foundations and a Barbie doll connected to the foundation that there are so many pro-life women in politics right now. One of the first published pieces I ever wrote for the Women's Quarterly ages ago had the title, "Now is so very then." Right now though, it's not, at the time that was just weird. Right now though, it's not insane to think this could someday be conventional wisdom. This past year, electorally, marked the mainstream exposure of a lie that I think is the National Organization of Women. Just the name. It's always been the National Organization of Liberal Women, of a specific type of woman. Last year's so-called Year of the Conservative Women, some won, some lost, manifested itself, of course, in the Tea Party movement. I shouldn't say of course, because I think that's an underplayed reality. The Sam Adams Alliance did a series of surveys on people who identify themselves as Tea Partiers and reported that almost half of the Tea Party leaders were women, some who have never had a career outside the home but felt the need to organize their communities in some way. There's a political entrepreneurship about them. There's an empowerment happening, the kind of things you'd think feminists would hail if they weren't actually more about ideology and then the happiness and advancement of women. But why I went on about the pill is it would be undercutting what's going on to see any rise of pro-life women as only political. We're experiencing, I think, a post-feminist moment. We're getting beyond feminism. I just read an interview where Michelle Bachmann refuses to call herself a feminist. Not a new feminist, just can we move beyond that? What seemed to be her attitude. I think it's also realizing that the sexual revolution was a little bit of a disaster too. That the pill hurt women and men, that pretending women could somehow be men was not only a failed mission, but a heartbreaking, undesirable one. And yes, it's a realization finally that women are not a monolithic voting bloc. Thanks so much.
Excellent. Good timing, too. Okay, our next speaker will be Diana Furchtgott-Roth from the Hudson Institute. Oh, and by the way, there'll be a lot of questions afterwards. After the three speakers, we'll have plenty of time for your questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming. And I'd like to thank the Clare Boothe Luce Foundation for organizing this. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today. And I really admire what Kathryn said. And the sad thing is that liberals are killing themselves off with their approach to abortion and the birth control pill. They are having fewer and fewer children. And here we are trying to save them when it's actually contrary to our interests. They are killing off the voters of the future. Whereas I have produced 6 children who are going to be 6 Republican voters to help carry our mission forward. Well, I was asked to talk about whether the values promoted by feminists are losing their appeal. And the answer is clearly yes, because we have now a 9.1% unemployment rate compared with 5 years ago when we had about a 4.6% unemployment rate. And jobs is the number one issue for all Americans. Feminists, men, everybody included, they're concerned about their own job. They're concerned about whether their friends and neighbors have jobs. And it's unfortunate that the policies that feminists promote are contributing to the increase in unemployment. Only 64.2% of the workforce of Americans are in the labor force. The labor force participation rate is about the same as it was in the mid-1980s. 45% of the unemployed have been out of work for 6 months or longer. We only created 54,000 jobs last month. The statistics are really dire. What's interesting is that as Congress debates the deficit, as they debate the debt ceiling right now, as Harry Reid says that he's going to come back right after the 4th of July to work on this problem, there are things that we could be doing, regulations we could be rolling back, all supported by the feminist ideology, that would make it far easier to create jobs in the United States. Let me just give a few examples. There are so many examples that I could go way beyond my 20 minutes, but I'm relying on Christina to stop me. And thank goodness I don't have to talk about Obamacare, because our expert, the world's expert, Grace Marie Turner, is here to do that. But just to take a few small examples, just look at the unholy alliance between the feminist movement and the union movement. And look at everything that the unions are promoting. Take one simple example. The National Labor Relations Board wants to stop Boeing from expanding in South Carolina. So Boeing has a plant that builds Dreamliners in Washington State. It can produce about 5 of these Dreamliners a month, but it has a backlog of 820 Dreamliners that it needs to build. So at a rate of 5 a month, it's going to have a backlog for a long time. So what did it decide to do? It decided to open a new plant. And for geographic diversity, and also because it was lower costs and better labor conditions, they decided to open a new plant in South Carolina. Well, the International Union of Machinists complained to the National Labor Relations Board that Boeing was retaliating against the union by placing its new plant in South Carolina. Even though Boeing is not reducing its workforce in Washington State, it has not fired one person. In fact, it's added people in Washington State overall since the decision was made to open the South Carolina plant. So here it has a new plant, started construction in 2009. It's just got off the ground, and the National Labor Relations Board wants to stop Boeing from building Dreamliners there. Now, what kind of signal is that sending to any company that wants to locate in the United States, especially in these unionized states? We've talked to Canadian companies who are planning on moving south of the Canadian border to places like Michigan and Illinois, and they are terrified. They think if they build one plant in Illinois, then if they want to move somewhere else afterwards, they are going to get tied up in a lawsuit with the National Labor Relations Board. Paradoxically, if Boeing had decided to build its next plant offshore in China, which is gobbling up more and more of the aircraft manufacturing industry, the National Labor Relations Board would not be able to close it down. So here is an example of something that is just choking off job creation in the United States. Let's take another example, affirmative action. Feminists are all in favor of affirmative action, the Paycheck Fairness Act, quotas for women, and these, again, discourage employment. So if you look at the www.reginfo.gov, you look at the Labor Department's regulatory agenda, there's a regulation there that would require affirmative action for women in on-site construction. Imagine that. Women have different characteristics physically from men, and many of them are not suited to be working on construction sites. Yet the Labor Department, even though the construction industry has suffered some of the most of any industry, during this recession, the Labor Department wants to impose this on the construction industry. President Obama, with feminist support, signed into law the Dodd-Frank Act, which has a provision, Section 342, creating 29 offices of minority and women inclusion. What this does is it has 29 offices where these directors of the offices would have the power to require fair inclusion of women, not just in these 29 regulatory offices, which are in the 12 offices of the Federal Reserve Board, the SEC, the FDIC, the Consumer Financial Protection Agency, all these financial regulatory agencies, but in the firms that are governed by these agencies. So if you're Citibank or Morgan Stanley or firm, you have to have fair inclusion of women and minorities. And this goes way beyond discrimination. This means that even if no Hispanic, no Pacific Islander, no African American has applied to your firm, you are still guilty if you do not include them, like Title IX in sports, of which Christina Hoff Sommers has written an immense amount. So what does this do to our country vis-a-vis other countries? So you have UBS, a Swiss bank, the president of Credit Suisse, of UBS in Switzerland, of Société Générale in France. They don't have to sit there worrying about who they hire. They don't have to sit there worrying about if they have Arabs or Algerians or women on their banks. No, they can just worry about profits. And this puts us at a disadvantage. And the way the law is structured is, it's not just the financial firms, it's also their contractors and subcontractors. So what that means is any catering firm, any shredding firm, any janitorial firm that cleans the offices of Morgan Stanley, they also have to have fair inclusion of women and minorities. And this places just a tremendous burden. This is something advocated by feminists, but again, it makes the United States a less friendly place to work in. Now, if we look at tax rates, here we have a big battle right now on the Hill. The Democrats want to raise taxes as a condition of increasing the debt ceiling. The Republicans want to cut spending. Anyone have any idea which side the feminists are on? Well, they all want to raise taxes. And again, that makes America a less competitive place to do business. We already have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. It used to be second highest. It used to be Japan had the top. But then Japan dropped its corporate tax rate at the beginning of the year. So increasing taxes, again, makes us less competitive. But this is something that all the feminists support. Again, this is something that I think people are falling out of favor with. If we were to have a national referendum over the weekend to say, do you want to cut government spending or do you want to raise taxes? I'm sure the majority of candidates would be in favor of cutting spending. In fact, it's very difficult now for a political candidate to get elected to office on a platform of increasing taxes, even though this is what the feminists want to do. Let's take a look at alternative energy regulations. Again, feminists support these regulations, and they create immense harm to our economy. 45% of our electricity is produced by coal, but the Labor Department wants to increase the regulations. Again, you can find this at reginfo, www.reginfo.gov. The Labor Department wants to increase regulations about dust in the coal mines, which will involve making it very difficult to mine coal. The Environmental Protection Agency wants to increase regulations on carbon emitted in the air in the form of what they say. They say it will help global warming, although it's not clear that if China and India don't join us in this, that it will do any good at all. We would just be cutting off our noses to spite our faces. But again, these regulations, getting rid of coal, which produces 45% of our energy, and putting in place other kinds of power, wind, solar, biofuels, which right now only produce 5% of our electricity, that's a very costly and expensive thing to do. I'm now working on a book called Green Jobs, Sick Economy, How the Green Revolution is Putting America in the Red, which describes the costs of some of these alternative energy proposals and their scenarios, all supported by feminists, all of which make the United States a less friendly place to do business. Because if you can't have inexpensive energy, you can't have manufacturing. And if you can't have manufacturing, then you lose jobs. So this is basically coming down to a decision. Do we want to live in a kind of morally superior universe where we think we're morally superior by kowtowing to these environmentalists, and yet we lose the means to support ourselves, and we don't have as many jobs as we had before? Well, maybe there's just a time for me to say a few words about the Paycheck Fairness Act. And Christina and I were in a conference on Capitol Hill last October, right before the vote on the Paycheck Fairness Act in the Senate. The Paycheck Fairness Act, very much supported by feminists and unions, by the way, would require all businesses, even small ones, to send to the government a list of their employees by race, by sex, and by earnings. So the government could check that men and women in the aggregate were being paid the same. Now, there are many reasons why men and women aren't being paid the same. 27% of women work part-time because they want flexibility to manage work and family. Women who do work full-time, that's over 35 hours a week, tend to work about 12% fewer hours than do full-time men. But feminists still want equality of salaries of men and women in the aggregate. And this doesn't take into account dirty, risky jobs that are mostly held by men. Think about Exxon, for example, that has a group of men primarily on oil rigs, a group of women in the service and backup sector. There isn't any reason these two groups should be paid the same. There's no reason that if a woman takes time off to have children or works part-time, she should receive the same salary as do men. Many women choose more flexible jobs with lower pay in order to have time to combine their work and their family. But these feminists don't agree. They want equality of outcome, and that's what this Paycheck Fairness Act is aimed at. Well, Christina and I organized this conference on Capitol Hill a few days before the vote last October. Two of Christina's friends came down from Maine, restaurant owners. They're called Jerry and Gail Sabbats, and they spoke about the effect it would have on their restaurant business and how no one in their town of Belfast, Maine, had heard of this bill, even though it had passed the House of Representatives in January 2009 and was in danger of being passed by the Senate. And they said, well, we are sure our representatives, our senators in Maine, are against this. Well, Christina and I nodded, but we were not at all sure. And we made sure that they visited the offices of Senator Snowe and Senator Collins before they left and went back to Maine. And the vote failed by just 2 or 3 people, it was. But the feminists haven't given up. Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro and Senator Barbara Mikulski have put forward the Paycheck Fairness Act again in April, so it's still there. It won't go through now because there's a Republican House of Representatives which will not let it through. But all I'm saying is these feminists have not given up on their targets, on their quotas. They think that everybody should be equal, that all outcomes should be equal, that men and women should have precisely the same salaries, the same jobs. They've moved their goalposts from equality of opportunity, the goal of the original feminists, to equality of outcome. And the problem is that equality of outcome has negative effects on our economy, negative effects on the ability of our economy to create jobs, which is, in fact, what people want. They want opportunity, but you can't get opportunity without having a job and without having upward mobility to move ahead. Well, there are many more issues I could touch on, such as the minimum wage and Obamacare, and there's a whole list of things that feminists are for, and you can see this by going to the National Organization for Women website, the website of Catalyst, the website of any of these feminist organizations, and you can ask yourself whether the policies they are recommending would be good or bad for the economy, and whether it's good for women and men to have a growing economy, and I think the answer is absolutely yes. I was born in England. I spent a lot of time in England before marrying my husband and getting my citizenship here. And what was extraordinary to me was how easily it is to make money in the United States. So as a student, I would come back here and I would have a summer job. There, my fellow students at Oxford, they would go on what they called the dole, on unemployment insurance, and they'd go off to Europe and have a vacation. And it's still a big difference between Americans and Europeans. The Europeans just tend to have a vacation during the summer. Americans look on, well, having a summer job is just the thing to do, and if you can't find a summer job, well, there's something wrong. So our work ethic is what keeps us going and what's made us into the country that we are today. And feminist policies would chip away at that work ethic and make us into a very different Europeanized country with higher taxes, mandated benefits like mandatory 2-year periods of maternity leave, mandatory paid sick leave. And that's not what we want. We want to be America. We want to let Europe be Europe. And with that, I'll turn it over to Grace Marie Turner, who's going to talk about how President Obama wants our healthcare system to be like Europe's.
Lovely job, all of you. It really is a pleasure to be here with you today and to be with these really courageous women, each one of whom in their own way has fought hard to express their values and their belief in this country and our freedom in their own work. And it hasn't been easy. a lot of times, because so much of the energy among women and women professionals is, well, of course you believe the government has all the answers and you believe in liberalism, right? And they are really leading the way. And Michelle, your work with the Clare Boothe Luce Institute is so important to keep this message and to really empower all of you to continue this voice and to really magnify these messages. Diana is so right that Obamacare is really the core and the essence of, I believe, liberal policy, and particularly the effort to move us toward a European economy. The issue is a huge issue for women, so I do think that we have to take the lead on this issue. It's not only an issue because many of us will be responsible for our family's health care, but also women are often responsible for the family budget, and it's a huge economic issue. So it's a health care issue, it's an economic issue, and ultimately it's an issue of life and death. Who's going to be making decisions about the medical treatments and the care that is available to us once this law takes effect? And people talk about it as a bill. They think what happens, this is law. This is the law of the land. It is coming at us like a freight train. And we need to understand what's in this legislation in order to be able to turn it back. There was a survey taken in the year 2000, and it was a very intense, extensive survey conducted by Lifetime Television and the Center for Policy Alternatives. And the basic question was, what do women want? This is leading up to the 2000 presidential election. And one issue came up so often in these focus groups. It wasn't something that the pollsters had even asked people about, but it came up so often that they had to include it as a real top-line issue in their survey. And that was that, it's a number, 72% of women brought up the issue that they want more control over their health care and their health insurance. It wasn't even on the list of questions that they were asking. They said, we can do a better job than health insurance companies, than our or our spouse's employer, in making decisions about the right kind of health insurance for a family. So in 2000, that was an issue. We want more control over that. We want more control over our retirement benefits. We want more portability. We want control. And so how did that get translated by liberals? It got translated into, let's have the government take this over. How is that responding to what women want? My friend Art Laffer, I know the Laffer curve. Art Laffer, I spoke at one of his meetings the other day, in fact, just after Newt Gingrich said, in sort of a preview of his Meet the Press, we don't want to have the government involved in social engineering, especially with Medicare. Excuse me, this is a government-run program. But Art Laffer said to me, thank heavens for Barack Obama. And I thought, you are crazy. And he said, no. He said, he has shown us all where liberalism takes us. Absolutely, full force. With 60 votes for one brief few moments in the Senate, and a majority in the House of Representatives, a liberal gung-ho president that I believe is certainly European sensibilities, maybe socialistic sensibilities, that he is so determined to show this country what liberalism means that we now get the message. We know where this leads. Several of my colleagues, including Tom Miller from the American Enterprise Institute, Bob Moffat from Heritage, and Jim Capretta from the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and I wrote a book, Why Obamacare is Wrong for America. This was published by HarperCollins. It's a serious, published New York publishing house and bookstores, and you can get it on your Kindle. You have a flyer there, actually, in your stack of things, and go wrongforamericabook.com. This explains what this law is going to do to the American people and to families, to young people, to taxpayers, to employers, to you and your doctor, to senior citizens. One by one, we already know what's going to happen. A lot of the literature, a lot of the studies are telling us what is going to happen. And, when they passed this law, I doubt if two people that voted for this law had actually read the whole thing. Nancy Pelosi's famous line, what's her famous line? You have to pass it, so we know. There's some lines that are really sinking into the consciousness. What's one of the other ones? If you like your health insurance, you're right. If you like your doctor, one of the things we know is none of that was true. But we are finding out what was in this law.
It'll reduce the deficit.
Oh, it'll reduce the deficit, yes. That's right. So when we look at what this law is actually going to do, young people, you are in the crosshairs of this law. They've decided that you're not paying enough for health insurance. And in order for older people like me to pay less for health insurance, you have to pay more. That's called community rating. In order to sort of even out, it's sort of the same philosophy Diana was talking about, that we want to make sure that everything is evened out, that we don't have older people having to pay more for health insurance while younger people pay less simply because they're younger and healthier and actually have lower incomes and greater needs for that income, student loans, starting families, mortgages. Nonetheless, we want to even that out. They also are targeting families. The cost of health insurance under this law, according to the Congressional Budget Office, is going to be more expensive as a result of Obamacare for many families than it would have been without it, by $2,100. So the president's promise that he would cut the average family's health insurance costs by $2,500 by the end of his first term actually is going to mean for many people an increase of $2,100 in the cost of their health insurance, which misses the mark by about $4,600 a year, which is a huge, it may not be a lot of money to the president, but it's a lot of money to me and it's a lot of money to virtually all families. Families are going to be absolutely, this law assumes that most people are going to keep their health insurance that they have at work. Well, a new study out by McKinsey, a survey of employers and what they're actually going to do once the law takes effect, shows that a third to half of them are going to drop coverage and send people to the exchanges. Social, government-run, taxpayer-subsidized health insurance. What's that going to mean? That's going to mean that a lot of more people are going to be on taxpayer-subsidized health insurance. It means that the government is making decisions about that insurance. It means that we as taxpayers are paying more for that coverage. By my calculations, as many as 78 million people could lose the coverage they have now with their employers. So how does that square with the, if you like your health insurance, you can keep it? I had a piece in the Wall Street Journal about this about 2 weeks ago, which also should be on your desk too. It's called, No, You Can't Keep Your Health Insurance. So families are absolutely targeted, and I think that the fact that the White House got so upset with McKinsey over this study shows that they know this is really the Achilles heel. 160 million people in this country get health insurance through their jobs, and it is a voluntary system. We need to fix the fact that 40 to 50 million don't have health insurance at some time. It's like a river flowing through the system. People in and out of jobs. Let's fix that instead of disrupting the system for everybody. Seniors. This law takes $500 billion out of Medicare to create 2 new entitlement programs. And it creates this new unelected, unaccountable board to make decisions about payment policy in Medicare, the Independent Payment Advisory Board. 15 people that are completely separated from the political process, making decisions about hundreds of billions of dollars in Medicare spending. If that's not unconstitutional, even liberals in Congress, even liberal Pete Stark from California, thinks this is not a good idea. So what's the president's solution? He wants to double down on this. He wants to take even more money out of Medicare, having this board give him new powers. And if Congress were to decide they want to overrule this IPAB board, he wants the IPAB to be able to sequester funds. so that Congress can't overrule this board of unelected, unaccountable experts, technocrats. That's where this goes. There was a decision yesterday you probably heard about in the Sixth Circuit in Detroit. All of us are upset because a conservative judge, Judge Sutton, appointed by George W. Bush, went along with the majority, 2-1, went along and basically supported the lower court's ruling that Obamacare is constitutional. Very upsetting. I have a piece that Kathryn has already posted on National Review today that I think is really important to understand what Judge Sutton did. I read until midnight, reading this 64-page opinion twice because I thought, I don't understand this. How could this happen? Why would a judge appointed by George W. Bush? He said that he doesn't have a choice. As a lower court judge, he says, I have to follow legal precedent. Legal precedent says, listen to me though, legal precedent says that basically Congress can do anything it wants through the Commerce Clause to regulate the economy. There have been no brakes on that for 70 years. And he said, I'm a lower court judge. If I'm following strict legal precedent, I cannot tell the Supreme Court that it has to, I can't say this is unconstitutional. He said only the Supreme Court can do that. He basically took the position that I am going to do a strict legal interpretation of what my abilities and my legal authority are under the law to declare this as constitutional, because everything else that the court has ever said is constitutional under the Commerce Clause of regulating the economy. But he said only the Supreme Court can say we've gone too far. And he basically pleads with them in his section of the opinion to do that and say, please do not let them get away with this. He took the hit. That is courage to me. He took the hit to say, I'm going to follow the letter of the law of what I'm allowed to do. And I want you, 9 justices, his opinion wasn't for us. It was for 9 justices. It was to say that you have let this Commerce Clause go so far to regulate our economy, now down to the point that they're going to tell us what health insurance, that we have to buy a private product with our own private money that the Congress and the government defines, that under every other Supreme Court decision, that's constitutional. Only you can say it's time to stop. The encroachment of federal power into our lives has gone too far. And basically he said, if you don't declare this unconstitutional, there is no end to what the Congress is going to be able to do to infringe on our freedom. So this is the issue of our time. It is an issue of freedom. It's an issue of prosperity. Why are companies not hiring? They're looking at a cost of $15,000, $20,000 to hire an employee. Not only they're not hiring, they're getting rid of jobs. It's the battle for freedom. It was the issue in 2010, even though people said, I don't know what's in this law, but I hate it. They know they don't want the government to control their health care. But really it gets down to, what does our future look like? And Judge Sutton said, this is the time to put the brakes on. Use this law to say they have gone too far, that we cannot allow the Congress to rule our lives, something as personal as these decisions, confiscating our income in order to purchase this product that they define, and lose our freedom to make decisions as personal as healthcare. So this is, the details matter in these court cases. If my piece is on National Review Online today, take a look at it. It's called Obamacare invites court to put the brakes on expansion of government power, something like that. But take a look at it, because I think each one of these battles is crucially important. Get a copy of the book. It talks about how this affects your future as taxpayers, our country's prosperity, hugely consequential for all of us. And I will do anything I can to help any of you in talking with audiences, and get a copy of our book. It's available on Kindle as well. Why Obamacare is Wrong for America. You need to know. Thank you all.